All right, welcome back to the Bridgeton Beacon. I am joined today by Brittney Ingersoll. Brittney is the curator over at the Cumberland County Historical Society, and we are going to talk all things history today. Brittney, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here today.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you on. And we've been talking about this for a little bit. So you are, and here at the Bridgeton Beacon, I'll just start by saying, we focus on people, places, and things in the Bridgeton, Cumberland County area that are doing really neat, interesting things and make it a great place to live, work, and play. And what I have found is that although when we first started the Bridgeton Beacon a couple years ago, we weren't really focused on the past. We weren't focused on history. Our focus was on the present. But what I have discovered over time is that, the history of our area is just so rich and so wonderful, and folks love sharing all of those interesting things. But also I have found that it's really important when I'm speaking with different people to touch on the history and to go back and not, forget about how we got to where we are. I've been a history buff my whole life. And so we've really become, I think even more recently here on the Bridgeton Beacon, extremely interested in the history of our area to tie it into the present. And so because of that, and we met through the Cumberland County Historical Society, because of that, I thought it would be great to have you on as a
Thank you.
local history expert to share with our listeners why history is important. Why should we all care about the history of our area? So that's kind of the stage I wanted to set for this conversation. But before we get into that, I want to ask you to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, the kind of who, what, when, where, and why of Brittney Ingersoll, and how you became so interested and so knowledgeable about history.
All right. Well, I am from Vineland, New Jersey, which is part of Cumberland, and graduated high school, was like a C student, didn't really know what I wanted to do, so wasn't planning on going to college. Ended up going and falling into history. I had a professor who just really got me interested. Uh, so I started at Cumberland County College. Well, what's Cumberland County College, now Rowan. And then from there, I transferred to Rutgers, Camden. I got really interested in social history, people on the ground, particularly people who uh, found themselves at odds with the law, or just working class people who economically struggled a lot. So and then once I graduated with my bachelor's, I moved on to the master's program at Rutgers Camden, and I got my master's in American history with a certificate in public history. And public history is just it's kind of a newer term. It's museum work. It's how to work with work in museums and different, and how to work with audiences and stuff like that. And then um, as of recently, I have started my library. I'm pursuing my master's in library science, and I will be done, which I'm very much looking forward to it, in May of this upcoming May. But I originally started at the Vineland Historical Society. I was volunteering there in 2013, and Jack Wood, who is was a former president of the society who passed away several years ago, he contacted Vine and was like, we're looking to hire someone. And so I applied, and I started working there in March of 2014, and I just never left. I was hired part-time to put the catalog into Past Perfect, and then I kept taking on more responsibilities. I loved working there, and I learned uh, I would I learned just the history from being there for so long, and then in 2018 I was promoted to full time and became the curator of the Historical Society.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
great. And you went to Vineland High School?
Yeah, I graduated. Oh, 09.
All right, there we go.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll just note that you had mentioned uh, that you have a master's in American history from Rutgers University, and I should note that that was with distinction. So
Yes.
you your grades improved over the years, and I think
Yeah.
that's certainly
Yeah.
if you study what you love, you generally will do very well.
Yes. I thank a lot of my hard work in graduate school to my professors um, who were so inspiring, but also were there if I needed any help and helped me helped push me to get me to where I needed to be academically.
Okay, why history though? What was the turn
I think
on initially with history?
I think I always liked history, but I didn't know it because I didn't like I'm not good with dates or numbers, which is like a
That's
pretty
surprising to
common
hear.
thing amongst historians. And so it was always so boring to me, but I loved going to museums and seeing old houses. And then I had to take a history class when I was at Cumberland, and there was this professor there who did not worry about dates, and he would just we'd walk in and it was like listening to a soap opera every day, and it would just like made me fall in love with it. So that
Do you
history
remember who
was
that
just
professor was?
yeah, Professor Nicholas Signari. And I think he's somewhere else. He left when I was still there.
Okay. It's neat to hear, when I talk to people and they mention somebody that was instrumental in their lives, and it sounds like he kind of gave you that history bug that hasn't left. So that's neat.
Yeah, yeah. I always hear people talk about like high school teachers, which my high school teachers, I have some that really stood out, and but a lot of the educators that really inspired me are the ones that I met in college.
Okay. So you is it safe to say that your focus now, and I've got your resume in front of me, and I'm really impressed with
Yep, thank you.
how many publications you've been a part of, how many, the books that you've been instrumental in assisting with, the presentations that you have. There's a laundry list of presentations that you have, um, you know, been involved in just in the last several years. I mean, your CV is extremely impressive for someone that's, for all intents and purposes, had a fairly short since your academic career. You're still in college, so kudos to you. Um,
Thank you.
it seems that like your focus has been for to a large extent on local history. Is
Hmm.
that safe to say? What
Yeah,
is it about,
oh no, sorry. Um,
what is it
I
about our area that's kind of
yeah,
kept your interest?
a part of it is mainly because of my role at the Historical Society. Our focus is Cumberland County, so it's finding the history that I love to. I think I've found a way to find the history that I love within the geographical area, which has made me love the area much. I I've mostly focused in Bridgeton, since focusing more on history, and or the local history. And it has knowing the history has made me love the city so much more. I just had a meeting with the mayor the other day regarding the Bridgeton Library, and I was just like, I love Bridgeton, and it's it's really a pride just wanting to be able to help in any capacity and just learning the really interesting history because Cumberland County as a whole it's just a very kooky place, especially like Vineland has a
Mhm.
very bizarre history. And Bridgeton also does when you start digging. So once you like get below the surface, you're like, there's some weird history going on here. And I just recently found that Millville does as well. So it's uncovering those histories that's made me really appreciate the area more and more. I think because it's just caught that of my historical interest, and it's made me value the area more.
Yeah, that's neat. You say uncovering, and I like that because you're almost like a detective, in your when you're researching. And I have followed, and we'll get into this in a couple minutes, but I follow your podcast, and you really have developed a niche of sorts when it comes to kind of quirky things that other people might not know. And
Mhm.
so, I part of the reason why I like to do this podcast is because I love speaking with people and having these conversations. Like we haven't prepared this at all. We're just having a conversation like we would over the phone. And I really like that. And I'm not a trained historian, but I like to think that these types of oral histories are really, really important. And having these conversations with people and kind of leaving this conversation, right? Somebody might listen to it in 100 years or maybe not, but it's history, right? Isn't it?
Yeah,
Primary,
it's
your
constantly
primary
being
source,
made.
right? So, you mentioned also that you were speaking with Mayor Kelly. You are a member of the board of the Bridgeton Public Library Board of Trustees, but you were also recently named a trustee. Is that right?
Yeah, I was just recently approved as a trustee for their board. I've been
Well,
working on their processing material in their vault for the last couple months. So and
congratulations. It's well deserved.
thank you. Oh, thank you. I'm looking forward to just helping getting involved in another local institution that is incredibly important and helping it grow.
hmm And the Bridgeton Library, you used to be able to go down there, maybe you still can, I'm not sure, and go on to the microfiche and read the old Bridgeton Evening News. And there was recently a project, am I correct, with the Historical Society where a lot of that was scanned in. Can you just speak about that a little bit while we're talking about the library?
Yeah. So recently, so most of the time when you come to the Historical Society's Limits Library, we have Genealogy Bank, which is like a paid service like newspapers.com. And they have majority of the Bridgeton Evening newspapers. And so it ended at like 1929. So we scanned from 1929 to 2008, I believe is when it ended. And then in the Bridgeton Library loaned us some of the missing reels some of the reels we were missing. So after the scans, we gave them a copy. And I know they're in the process of making that accessible to the public.
That genealogy bank is great. We have
Mhm.
started, we meaning the Bridgeton Beacon, we have started utilizing that genealogy bank, and you would actually turn me on to that.
Yeah, I love
And
it.
yeah, we actually check it out. My producer Tom actually did this on his own, but we are going to start um, doing a little clip where we pick a front page of the Bridgeton Evening News from 100 years ago
Oh,
and just
fun.
read some of the old articles, which is kind of what you do for the Cumberland County Historical Society. I see on the Facebook page you do that. And I love reading that. That's kind of neat.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's I do the posting. Tia, one of our administrative assistant, and she's also a docent. Tia Antonelli has been writing all those up for us and going through our ephemera collections and everything.
Right. You
So we're
said
trying.
docent. What is a docent for our
It's a
listeners who
tour
may not
guide.
know that term?
It's a
A tour
fancy
guide?
term for a tour guide. Yeah.
Got it. And a curator is kind of the same thing, or?
No, I take care of it's kind of hard to explain. I take care of almost everything. Like it's like I do like administration work, I do exhibits, I wear lots of hats. But that's just kind of the setup most of the time in smaller historical societies. But I I have a hard time saying the Cumberland County Historical Society is very small because I don't think it is. I think it's a pretty large institution with a number of museums.
Well, and it's got a rich history.
Mhm. Yeah, since
You know,
1905.
that's impressive. That the historical society began in 1905, so that says a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of history there. Um,
Yes.
one question that I have for you, and this has come up a lot recently. When you are conducting your research, do you primarily look to newspapers or prior publications? And what I'm getting at is, I'm curious. When you've got a master's in history, you're working on a master's um, in library science with a concentration in archives and preservation. AI, artificial intelligence. What is the, um, I guess, official position of true historians on how, if at all, you can utilize AI in your research? And is it a matter of kind of just fact checking, or is it completely off limits?
I know in a library school, I took a class last semester, and I forget what the class was called, but we discussed different ways in which we could use like it was just like an idea session of different ways to start bringing a how we could use AI in different ways. I unfortunately don't remember the details of it. I am not privy to I don't know a lot about AI.
Right. Well,
Um yeah, so I know like it's a lot of concern in the in like academia amongst professors about students using like ChatGPT to write papers and everything.
mhm,
But it's also pretty, I've heard a lot of people say it's also very easy to catch because it's
mhm,
not very detailed. So it's like very surface level. And
mhm,
so I don't know. I know in the library science circle they're thinking of different ways, but I'm not sure about the history spectrum, like what they're looking
mhm,
at. But when I begin research, I start at newspapers. I have like key terminology, like key terms, that I go through to try to find stories because a lot of the time there's um really nothing pre-written outside of the newspapers on individuals that I'm looking for, except for like maybe vital records and census records.
Do
And
you start with
sometimes
genealogy bank?
I do, yes. I love genealogy bank. And actually I just wrote a paper that the Sojourn that's under Sojourn is the Stockton magazine is currently looking at to see if they want what if they will accept it. Um, but yeah, so I usually begin at genealogy bank and I have like I said pre-term key terms I look up to try to see if I can catch any articles of my interest. But since this last research assignment, I think also going to the courthouse and looking at their 19th century court records would also be an interesting avenue to start beginning at as well.
Okay. And I'll just note for our listeners that anybody can go on to genealogybank.com. And I think it was only like $25 a year to get a subscription.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
great resource.
it is. Now, what does what you were instrumental in scanning in from the Bridgeton Library that's currently housed at the Historical Society in Greenwich? How is what is contained in those, I guess, archives different from what you get on Genealogy Bank, or is there an overlap?
Actually, it's just so funny. So when we were doing that project, I kept contacting Genealogy Bank to see if they would like our microfilms to scan them to add, and I couldn't find the right person to talk to. And so we did the project, and everything is now updated on Genealogy Bank's idea. So now it looks like everything's similar. So, which is
Okay.
fantastic.
Okay, so now that means that anybody can just sit from their home and go on the genealogy bank. Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Um, so what was you mentioned just a second ago that you were working on an article to submit to Stockton's Sojourn magazine. What's your most recent research been about?
I have it was on it was looking at because in archive studies there's a lot of discussion over voices and representation that you're not finding in the archives due to just either maybe materials not saved, but also how archivists themselves choose what to keep and what not to keep, and what they find important and what they don't find important, and how that can affect whose voices are preserved in the archives. So I did that. So I took that argument and then I did a case study with three women who were living in Bridgeton, Millville, and Vineland, and whose lives other than like newspaper articles and vital records, nothing further was preserved. Um, which gives us like snapshots into their lives and doesn't give us this fuller, richer history. But the one woman was really interesting. Her name was Anne Garrison, and Bill Sonderland helped me get some vital statistic records, which was instrumental. But she was just she just found herself in a lot of trouble. She was hanging out. She was from Millville, and there was this area, I forget where it was at, but it was in Millville, and it was called like the Sandro, and it was like this bad area. And she was involved in a disorderly house there. So disorderly houses are really kind of ambiguous terms because they can be brothels, but they can also just be like a rowdy house. Sometimes they can be almost like uh illegal bars. They'll sell beer illegally sometimes. But her and her roommate were arrested. Her roommate was found not guilty, but Anna was found guilty. But one of the funniest things I've ever seen was she was accused for just cursing all the time and having a foul mouth. And her rebuttal to it was, I only curse when I'm mad. And I just love that documented in a newspaper.
That's great.
Um,
Well, what made you pick her? I mean, and I'm going to segue in a minute here to your podcast because, and
yeah,
in reviewing the articles that you've written, there's quite a few on brothels, which I think is kind of neat,
yes.
and also the podcast that you do with two of your colleagues, um, kind of focuses on this idea of women's history and how women have been portrayed in history. But before we get to that, what made you pick Miss Garrison to study?
I think I was just Googling like disorder because like the term brothel and prostitutes are not really like they're not printed in the Bridgeton papers very well. So it's kind of like finding and reading between the lines. Like sometimes they have like the name of their disorderly house, and you're like, there's no way that wasn't a brothel by the name. I think one of them was like Burning Bush. And and I just kind of sometimes they'll print really long in-depth stories, and I think that's how I hooked on to Annie Garrison. But it's so funny because she had several husbands throughout her life. Her first husband deserted her, and they got divorced, and he remarried, and he ended up killing his wife, his second wife, 6 months after they were married. And then so her second husband was an Ingersoll, and I was telling my mother-in-law like I didn't think anything of it, and she pulled up the family tree and was like, "Oh yeah, we're related to him." So that was fun
Uh,
to see
that's kind of
like
neat.
yeah,
Mm-hmm. Little
but
family
yeah,
history.
yeah. Um, but yeah, I just kind of if the story's real thick and then like it's like real like if it's a hefty story and then I just kind of I'll look up the person's name and if there's more attached, then I just kind of fall down a rabbit hole, which is always an amazing feeling when you're just like hooked to someone. You're like, I just need to find as
To
much
know
as I
more.
can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it goes back to what you said a couple minutes ago about kind of uncovering those quirky, neat stories that other people may not know about, right? And so, along those lines, I mean, that does seem to be maybe your area of specialty, female, the history of women in our area, that maybe we're not so well behaved, right? So, I guess that's a good segue to talk about your podcast. So why don't you tell our listeners about your podcast, how it got started, who's on it, and what you guys talk about.
Yeah. So yeah, the podcast is made up of Rose Emily Matthews. She's like our producer. She's the one that it was her idea to start the podcast and everything. And then her daughter, Kate Matthews, she helps us as well. And then the two other hosts that I work with are Victoria Scanella and Tia Antonelli, who are
Uh,
both staff members as well at the Historical Society. And it just started out as like, let's tell different histories all over the place, histories that interest us, and um, it's been a really fun project that we
it,
are
it's a
continuing to
great
work on.
it's a great podcast to listen to, and I would certainly suggest to all my listeners that they hop on over. Tell us where we can find it.
It's on Spotify. Yeah, I know it's on Spotify. I think it's only on Spotify. We do also share the videos. We just started doing videos, and those are on our YouTube channel at the Cumberland County Historical Society's YouTube. And then Spotify is Not Well Behaved Women.
Okay, I'm just going to pull it up so I can make sure that our listeners can find it. Um, was there more than one YouTube channel for the Historical Society, or did I imagine that?
No, there's just one, but there's
Just
like
one.
Cumberland County and Pennsylvania.
Okay, maybe that was it. So it's the Cumberland County Historical Society, New Jersey, and I like the video too. I think that makes it more fun. Where do you guys record that?
At the bookstore in Pittman.
Okay, what made you pick there to record?
Rose Emily is friends with the owner, and she said that we could use the space because we were recording when it was just sound at the Gibbon House, but since the museum's open and it's kind of tight in there, so it's been really nice recording in there.
Excellent. Yep. So it's Cumberland County Historical Society, NJ, and the podcast is the Not Well Behaved Women podcast, which is great. I love it. Um,
We only curse when we're
so
mad.
there we go. I like it. That would be a great name of the podcast. We only curse when we're mad. Um, so so I want to just ask you, you mentioned a couple minutes ago that our area has some really kind of quirky history. Can you share with our listeners maybe, and we didn't prepare this, so I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but
Oh no, I know.
give us a story. You talked about Miss Garrison, but give us a story that may interest our listeners that perhaps folks in the Bridgeton area may not know. Um,
All right.
so I'll turn it over to you for that. Like, what's your favorite kind of? This is like a cocktail party
Yeah.
story.
Oh, that'd be a good idea, like cocktails based on the kooky characters of Bridgeton. Um, there's
Exactly.
one fellow that is near and dear to my heart. was ended up finding and learning about him because we had a broadside within the collection at the Historical Society, and it was like reptiles, animals, all these animals for sale in Bridgeton by this guy named Otis G. Bellows. And
Otis G. Bellows.
yeah, and I was just
Okay.
like, I need to know more about him. So I went to Genealogy Bank, and it just unraveled this whole story. He had like this museum shop. It's been a while since I looked into this research, so it's a little foggy, but um he pretty much wanted to be like the next Bartle. He held a seance one year on Christmas. He had animal museums so you could go and see his animals. He had both he talked about how he had these rare birds that he sent over to the zoo in Philadelphia, and I checked those records and I haven't been able to find documentation on the libraries or on the zoo's end of it. But he wanted to do a traveling Indian show, and what those were like exhibits of indigenous people that would you so you'd go around, and in these spaces you could also buy like um different like medicine, like fake medicine that was mostly like 90% alcohol but could cure everything or claim to cure everything. So he had that and that failed. But he also was friends with some of the bigger he knew he had connections with some of the bigger circus people that were popular at the time. But yeah, he was a big deal when he died. I forget what school it was. It may have been the West Jersey Academy. Ended up acquiring some of his like a lot of his taxidermy.
Did he live in
But
Bridgeton?
mhm. Yep, he moved several times up around Bridgeton. Uh, I don't think his parents, I think they were from New York. Yeah, he was in Bridgeton, and he only really left when he did the Indian shows. He also did
Okay.
minstrelsy shows as well in Bridgeton. So he was like he was like a Barton. So
What year did he live? What time frame?
he was around 1890, 1880 to maybe 1910. He was within that window. He was alive in Bridgeton.
Got it. I
Hmm.
grew up in an old house on Lake Street, 60 Lake Street, and the house was built in the 1860s, I think 1865 or 1868, and there was an old schoolhouse out back, um, and Miss Carey had a schoolhouse, had a little school there, and so I'm really interested in um, local architecture,
Hmm.
local
Oh,
architecture and homes. So I kind of want to do a series on some older homes in town and maybe tour them. I'm curious,
oh,
and
that'd be
what I'm
cool.
getting at is I'm curious where he lived.
Oh, I can send you the like his moving
Hmm.
because I that's one thing I always like to do is I like to do drive-bys once I know
Hmm.
where some of these people were living. I like to go and see if the house is
Me
still
too.
standing.
Right, me too. I think that's really, really neat. And um, the other thing that's interesting that I've checked out is Broad Street Cemetery. Um, there, there was a while ago I was interested in um, the trial involving um, the gentleman that was Robert Haltman, who was charged with the kidnapping and murder of the Lindbergh baby, and the
Oh, wow.
judge in that trial was actually from Bridgeton, and he's buried up there. So I
Oh,
had gone there to look. Yeah, so
very
it's kind of neat.
cool.
But you're right. I think really what it comes down to is there are so many ties to our area, and I've always said that Bridgeton and the surrounding area is kind of like a microcosm for the country. So I think it's important to know the history and to keep these stories kind of passing down from generation to generation. But the only way to do that is through folks like yourself who are willing to take the time and the energy to conduct research that's accurate, right? And we could probably go on about, history and what is truth and what is fiction kind of thing. Um, but I guess to a large extent, you are relying on the newspaper articles and how they were written at the time. And so I think that goes back to what you were saying a couple minutes ago about, um, you know, the the way those women that you were researching were portrayed. And the I guess the only way to question the articles is just to continue to do research, right?
Yeah, and I think and one thing like being trained is you're always aware of subjectivity. So
Hmm.
understanding in which the framework of society in terms of like what they saw as moral standards and beliefs and how people should behave and understanding that and being able to see the framework of like of the newspaper, what it's telling you, and understanding that it's within that context.
Sounds like the beginnings of a dissertation. I think, has anyone ever really kind of delved in, to kind of take that topic and expand it? And I'm kind of, as I'm looking at all of the articles that you've written, has anyone really ever done an in-depth study of uh, women in history in our Cumberland County area?
I think yeah, I think we have, but I think it's like it's not consolidated. I
Hmm.
know that the research club, they have a book that sits on many shelves in the area on local shelves, which is I do think is a very good resource. It's on like individual women throughout the area, throughout the county. And I think it is very instrumental in in telling women's stories that of women you wouldn't normally know. And then
Yeah,
I
I
think
like that.
that, yeah, it's a very good resource.
You said the research club. What is that?
It's a local club, and from my understanding, they hold meetings sometimes at the Lummus Library. So I've only been at one of their meetings, but from what I can ascertain is they research and then they present their research. It's a very cool club.
That's pretty neat. I
Yeah,
would like to know more about that. So, have you told me all that you know about that or that club?
Yeah, I can give you contacts of it, but
Hmm.
yeah, it looks like, and then I don't know how often they hold meetings. I don't know if it's once a month or if there's more time between the meetings. But yeah, they'll have one person who does a deep dive into a subject matter. I guess that is pre-planned, and then they do the presentation at the meeting, and then they have food, and seems like a really cool
Seems
group.
like they'd be almost like a wing of the historical society, no?
Yeah. Yeah, and they were the ones that put together that fantastic book.
Okay, that's neat. I'd like to get some more information on them and maybe have somebody come on and we can talk
Yeah,
more.
definitely. I can give
Um,
you a contact.
Thank you. I like what you're saying about telling the story of people that maybe nobody else knows about,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
That's interesting to me. Like finding the extraordinary in the ordinary.
yeah. And I think it helps people connect who are more like like for me, I remember I took this class at Rutgers Camden. It was an undergrad class and it was called Lives, and it was about the
Low
history of
lights?
like, yeah, low lives. It was
Interesting.
it was about just regular everyday people or people who also found themselves at odds with the law. And it was mostly 19th century, which is my bread and butter. And I remember the professor went around and she asked everyone, like, why did you pick this class? And I said, I was like, because if my family and myself were, this is the class they would be. That like I identify with a lot of that. And I think that while maybe I think teaching different histories and bringing those histories to life, I think it helps people connect with the past who may not even um, be related in any sense. But it makes sense. They see a part of themselves in the past in some capacity, and I think that that helps them grow in interest. I think it helps the public become interested, and also just knowing the fun, kooky stories of some of the
Yeah, I
people.
mean, I think what you just said, that's it in a nutshell as to why history is important. It's not just about the dates, memorizing dates, or it's not just about the quote unquote famous people, right? It's about the Miss Garrisons or the Otis Bellows of the world. That's what really makes history so rich.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because it's like, oh, they were just like me, trying to get by,
Yeah.
doing stuff they liked doing, getting in trouble. Like,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You don't have to be well behaved
no,
to make the history books.
no.
uh, yeah. I like I'd like to learn more about um the women in the area that were lawyers back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, because there weren't a lot of them.
Yeah, that,
And if you ever go over to the Cumberland County Courthouse and walk around, in a lot of the courtrooms, they have the composite photos from the Cumberland County Bar Association. And I remember one day when I was still practicing law, I was in court and waiting for my case to get heard, and looking at a composite photo. It was only from like the 60s, and there was just a couple women, and that kind of interests me as an attorney. But you're right. I think there's probably a lot of Miss Garrisons out there that would be really neat to learn about. But like you said, it takes a lot of work. But knowing that you can at least start the research with the genealogy bank is, I think, a great resource for everyday folks.
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it doesn't, you don't, thank God to like, because I know like when I was a lull between my two degrees after I graduated with my master's, I lost a lot of I lost all my access to university libraries, which is so instrumental to researchers. So it's learning the weird ways of how to get around sometimes when the resources aren't there, but there are ways, and thank God to these online newspaper sources and um different like family search as well have been really helpful with at least starting and building a space on which you can do the research.
Like Ancestry.com, you mean?
There's one called Family Search. It's
Okay.
through the Church of Latter-day Saints. It's free. You just have to make an account. But they have a lot of
Family
census
search.
records. Yeah,
Okay,
.org.
that's neat. Okay, I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to check that out. Um, and I would love to be able to stay in touch. You know, you and I, and maybe have you continue to come back on the Bridgeton Beacon, and we'll certainly continue to promote your podcast, which I love. Um, but but I think what we're going to start doing is an annual um, kind of like short documentary or series on an area that is historical in nature in the Cumberland County area. So um, perhaps we can partner, to some extent, to bring these topics to our community. I think that would be fun, and I think it would be a
Yeah,
kind of a neat thing to do if you're
that'd
interested.
be fantastic. Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Thank you so much.
Okay. Fantastic. Great. So our listeners want to get more involved in learning about history in Cumberland County, what should they do? We talked about Genealogy Bank. Um, how can they support the Cumberland County Historical Society and the important work that all of you do over there?
Well, if you want to get more into history, we have a blog online. I've also recently made our newsletters public on our website, so you can look at those. They have a lot of great, well-researched articles, and the sources are all linked, are noted on each article. So you can see where all the information has come from. Um, because that's always a good starting point when you're researching anything, seeing what other people have written on it and looking at their sources and then going and looking at those materials. To help the Historical Society, check out what we're doing. We have lots of programs going on currently. We have our big anniversary coming up October 5th, and that is free to the public. And if you're interested becoming a member, that you can also become a member on our website as well. And yeah, and we're always happy to accept financial donations, but
Of
no
course.
pressure. But yeah, just engaging with us too. Like we're trying to post. One of my goals in this month is making sure that we have something to post every day and on social media, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. We've kind of taken a little break from TikTok. We're going to try to get that revamped, but yeah,
Hmm.
we just want to share as much history with people as we can.
Okay, great. And I would just say also that all of your events are available not just on the website, which is cchistsoc.org, but also on your Facebook page, Cumberland County Historical Society. So I would encourage all of our listeners, if you haven't already, to like the Facebook page, follow it, share the posts. You do a really great job at sharing tidbits from the newspaper articles. It's kind of where we've got our idea to start
Thank you.
doing a little preview of 100 Brittney news from 100 years ago. So I think it's all great. I really thank you for joining us today, Brittney.
Oh, thank you so
And
much.
please come back.
Yes, thank
Stay in
you.
touch. And
Definitely.
and if there's, like I said, if there's anything that you're working on that you want to come on and promote and share with us, please do. So the next big event, you mentioned it a minute ago, October 5th.
Mm-hmm.
And
From
tell us what that is.
That is going to be at the Gibbon House. It's going to be an anniversary of the tea. We have a lot going on, not just on the grounds, but in town as well. We're going to have a kids mustering program at I want to say noon. The dates, the times, the exact schedule is online. And then we have Dr. John Fia, who will be discussing the tea burning at 2 o'clock at the Lummis Library. And then we are doing a tea burning where everyone will be invited to throw a piece of tea into the fire themselves. So we are
All
so
right,
excited.
come on down to Greenwich and burn some tea.
Yes.
Brittney, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right.